Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, legislative priorities, opinions, and perspectives that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. There's a photo nestled in the middle of an issue of Encinitas magazine from a few years back, showing a smiling, already full of ambition, 11-year-old girl named Catherine, wearing a judge's cape, holding a gavel, sitting on a courtroom dais, likely in San Diego County, where she lived, on a day when her mom was serving as a temporary judge for the day. She looks in command of the court. Did that pint-sized experience on the courtroom bench light a fire in that 11-year-old for a future in government, policy, and politics? Well, fast forward a few decades, that same young lady has already been a mayor of a Southern California city and is in her first year as a California state senator. And on this edition of Then There's California, we'll spend some time getting to know the former juvenile jurist and now current senator, Catherine Blakespear. Senator Blakespear represents California's 38th Senate District, which encompasses northern San Diego County and southern Orange County, including the cities of Encinitas, Oceanside, Mission Viejo, and Camp Pendleton. Senator Blakespear is a fourth-generation native of San Diego County, spending a good part of the last decade plus working in local government as a traffic commissioner, a council member of the city of Encinitas, and a three-term mayor of that same city. She comes to Sacramento with a full plate of policy priorities, some carried over from her local government portfolio, including affordable housing and homelessness, public transportation, environmental priorities, and gun violence prevention, which will help complement her appointments to the Senate Governance and Finance and the Housing and Transportation Committees. All of which and more we hope to touch on in this get-to-know-you conversation with Senator Blakespear. Welcome to Then There's California.
Wow, well, what an introduction.
We try to make it smashy and snazzy here.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you. And congratulations and welcome, I guess, 7 or 8 months late to the state Senate.
Oh, no, I'm happy to be here.
Before we go forward in this, let's go back a little bit with what I hope is my only slightly cliche question of the conversation. Here's this photo of you, of this 11-year-old girl in the courtroom. Would that 11-year-old girl easily conceive of herself of being a mayor someday or representing 1 million plus people in the California state? Would she be proud of that?
Yes, well, it makes me verklempt just seeing this. It's such a nice memory.
It was in that magazine, and I said, look at that. There she is at 11 years old. Did she have those kind of ambitions at 11 years old? Because, you knew her.
Well, I would say that, so my mother and my father are both attorneys, but my mother is an attorney and she was sitting as a judge on this day. And so she invited me to come see her in court. And then she invited me to come up there and put on the robe and have the gavel. And it was really exciting to participate in that and to see her work. And I think, she is here with me in Sacramento right now because she's been shadowing me. She's always done that. And I've always done that. She also invited her parents to shadow her when she was acting as a judge and in her work. So my mom would come to my college classes and visit me at all the different professions that I've had. And so, yeah, it's, when I look back at this picture and your question of, did I always see myself as doing something like this? I guess I would say that my mom probably had the biggest influence on my professional aspirations because she had a really clearly defined worldview that was basically like, she had this phrase, and I'm becoming emotional talking about it because she's so important to me.
And she's here.
I know, exactly. But no, her phrase was, there's always room at the top for the best. So the idea that you should have goals and you should, set them and then work toward them and think about yourself as a professional, think about yourself as the best version of yourself and then work toward that. And so I feel like that's always been something that I've tried to do. There's so much to do in this world. There's so much exciting things to do. And so I've really worked to be involved in a lot of different things, law, journalism, policymaking. And so this, is what I'm doing right now. And it's a tremendous honor to be chosen to be a state senator. But I do credit my mom with being the strongest influence in my life to get there.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story. And notwithstanding the differences of being a lawmaker at the local level and being a lawmaker here at the state, how is life up here representing, again, those 1 million plus people from the 38th Senate District?
Well, it's really great in that it's very intense. It's very interesting. What we're doing is important, and the people around me are really smart. So I find that my days they're not just busy with busy work. They're busy with serious intellectual engagement and working on the big problems of the day. So like I said before, I feel that tremendous sense of honor to have been chosen to be able to do this work and to try to make things better. I mean, ultimately, I think everybody in elected office is trying to solve problems.
Right.
So being up here, it's very far from home. It's an hour and 10-minute flight.
Yes.
It is very far from my constituents, too. And I come from local government where your constituents are always right around you all the time. And as a mayor, there's just a very visceral, emotional connection to the constituency, especially when they're upset. But here, the people who interact with me on a daily basis are professionals, and it's all, in a way, highly sanitized. There's a lot of politics maybe behind the scenes, but there's not the emotionality that you have in local government.
Senator Menjivar, she noted how similar it is to being back in college with so much to learn so quickly and the challenge of having to be a mini expert on a variety of issues. Transportation 101, Environment 101. Senator Aisha Wahab reflected on her first week in office, and she said she was feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome for a while, not feeling in charge of her own schedule and having to make a conscious decision to be the leader. And Senator Lola Smallwood Cuevas compared it to literally to entering the twilight zone. So do any of those freshman Senate experiences ring familiar to you in the 7-8 months you've been here?
Well, the thing that's the most similar when I think back about the different jobs, it's actually not being a mayor or being a city council member. It's my first job was as a reporter. So I have a journalism degree, a bachelor's and a master's in journalism. And then my first job was at the LA Times. And the LA Times is obviously a fantastic newspaper. And at that time in 1999, there was an expanding economy and they were hiring new reporters. And so I was in the middle of a newsroom with really experienced people all around me. And the work product as a journalist is very public, because you're writing a story and it's in the newspaper and you're talking to people and you have to get your arms around an entire subject matter, at least of that story, to write that story.
Right.
And my beat at the time was transportation, which really inspired a love of urban planning that I still have today. And so that experience, I felt like I could see the stories and I could see the important things I wanted to cover. But at the beginning, I had a hard time translating that into the actual thing day after day after day. And that's what I'm experiencing now, is that I feel really engaged by wanting to solve and work on homelessness and gun violence prevention and climate change and transportation, transit, promoting those things. But how to translate that into the actual bills and then to have those bills move through committees successfully, that's the art of it. And I recognize that as a new legislator, you don't walk in automatically having the contacts or the ideas that can be translated into a bill. So that experience I had as a new reporter of really wrestling with, how do I wrestle this idea down into the thing that's the actual work product? That's where I feel like I'm struggling a little bit, not struggling, but working on it. Mm-hmm. That my bill package, hopefully as I go on, will be more and more ambitious.
And I want to talk about that bill package and some of your other policy priorities that you brought with you from San Diego County, but also are introducing here in Sacramento. But first, let's talk about real quick your 38th Senate District, nestled within the boundaries of Southern Orange County and Northern San Diego County. Many Californians from the north part of the state may think they know your communities. They've read a tourist brochure, or they've rented a Airbnb on the beach, but there are some unique dynamics to your district, which may mirror some of those also in other districts. Walk us through your 38th.
Yes. Well, I do think I have the most gorgeous district in the entire state.
And I should add that pretty much every member I've talked to agrees with that on their own district. So, but that's good. That's your job. That's your job.
Well, everybody who goes to my city of Encinitas or to the district says how stunning it is. It's of course, Southern California.
Yes.
It's largely coastal. So in San Diego County, it's coastal. And in Orange County, it's inland. So about a third of the district's in Orange County and then 2/3 in San Diego County. And I come from local government, so I'm very aware of the land use struggles, the really difficult realities of how do we add more housing when we know we have a housing shortage in this state that is over 1 million units. I mean, we need to build over 1 million low-income units in this state. And so the reality of the struggles between preservation and enhancement, and I go back to, that was actually my first campaign slogan in 2014 when I ran for city council, preserve and enhance. So the idea that we we all love this community, this city, this district that we live in. How do we keep it and its essence what it is, while also making it better and solving the problems that are emerging, like homelessness?
Prior to being elected to the Senate last fall, you had wrapped up, as we said, 3 terms as the mayor of the city of Encinitas, a leadership presence, which I thought was interesting, that one of your colleagues had referred to as an era, which I think is a tremendous compliment to you, as much as it was just a 6+ year experience on the dais. You were previously a council member. You were a city traffic commissioner, not in that order. But in those 3 mayoral terms, you formed valuable partnerships and friendships. You invested so much blood, sweat, and tears in a city that birthed you. What did you learn as mayor? And what were some of your proudest accomplishments?
Yes, I mean, it was very touching to have my term in office called the Blakespear era by a close council watcher. And I think that I really focused on transportation improvements, and we did things that were transformational and really difficult, because sometimes things are happening while you happen to be sitting there, but then other things you put a lot of will in, you lean in, it's like a dog with the nose pushing forward, and you just bird dog it. You say, we need to do this, so let's do it. So on the environmental front, I think on the equity front, in terms of being more inclusive, like, for example, being the first city in the county to fly the rainbow flag in June. This was during Trump's presidency. And being willing to be at the tip of the spear on things that were difficult. We opened a safe parking program for our unhoused residents that was very controversial. And then we completely transformed the road network on Highway 101, which goes through the downtown part of our city and next to the beach, and put in protected bike lanes and a coastal rail trail and did traffic calming. And whenever you change the way people use public space, they can get really, really upset about that. And so there's not always consensus, of course, because if it was easy and if there was consensus, it would have already happened. But these are things that need to happen and that are unquestionably a benefit now that they're there. And so I feel proud of being willing to do it. But it was tough, and it has been tough at times, because I have been targeted personally and just within the political realm, and that makes it unpleasant. When you're in local office, you want to make people happy. I think we all do.
And it becomes very personal because it's local office too. Yeah,
exactly.
And I'm sure it's difficult as a local official coming to a bigger job like this here at the State Senate. There's a lot of unfinished business, and that you now have to leave in the hands of someone else who hopefully shares your same values and priorities. Did you have that same difficulty too?
Well, I am very well aware of the fact that we sit in these seats for a short time, and you should make the most of it. Do what you can. And I'm always hoping to and reminding myself to make sure to be as active as possible. And I want the people who follow me to be active. So I cheer them on. The mayor who followed me is someone I've known a really long time, and we served together. And I think he's doing a great job. And then the people on the council, they will struggle just like everybody does in local office, but they'll also have successes. And I hope they're as ambitious as we were when I was the mayor. And I expect that they will be. And I was also very involved in regional government. So I was the chair of the transportation agency, SANDAG, and I was on the airport authority, and I was on water and wastewater boards, and I was on LAFCO. So there are a number of different roles hats you wear, and that has been without question a benefit to this local service, because I know what these organizations do, and I also am aware of the way government works at its multiple levels. So I think that at least on the committees that I'm on, governance and finance, housing, transportation, that local government background is tremendously valuable.
I know that you have worked hard to make sure that your city knows about, learns about, and respects its deep roots, your city of Encinitas. Your roots, as we mentioned, go deep. You're a 4th-generation San Diego County resident. Your grandparents came here to the state and to that part of the state, Cardiff by the Sea, a century ago. Where does the life story go from there to this point?
Well, in many ways, my family's life story mirrors the society around me. So there have always been migrations related to agriculture and jobs, and my great-grandparents moved there and grew flowers. My grandma, when she was a teenager, would drive the flowers that they grew up to the LA flower market, leaving at 2 a.m. to be able to go on a trip that now takes an hour, took 6 hours. This was before the highway system and everything. So my great-grandparents and grandma grew up in agriculture. And then my grandparents, it was in that post-war period where they were in construction, paving roads. Smith Construction Company was the largest employer in Cardiff. It was the 1950s, 1960s. And then my mom is a professional, a lawyer. She grew up in a family where she was the first generation to go to college, and she went to law school and met my dad at Northwestern where they went to law school. And then they had me, and I'm a lawyer, and my sister is a professional. And so I went to Northwestern as well for undergrad and moved away, worked as a reporter, and then went to law school and met my husband and moved back to my hometown. So we moved back when we had little babies, just a 6-week-old and a 1-year-old, because we wanted to live near our family. And it was always clear to me, and I think this was one of the other messages that my mom communicated to me, that nobody is going to be able to be this personal social safety net and love your kids like your family. And so if you can organize your life so that your family is part of it, everybody will be the richer.
Yes. I know the roots go deep. You love your district. Your weekends as a senator in the 38th are as busy as your 4 days here in Sacramento. You are involved in something almost every day on the weekends.
Right.
You just did a fruit picking event. I mean, it's wonderful. You're out there engaged with the community. You're a reminder to folks that the Senate doesn't just hang up its coat on Thursday and go home. That really the work for the constituents is just as important.
Right. Well, the constituents in the district elect me and elect all of us. So it's really important that we are present, that we show up for them, that we are aware of the things that are happening, and that we give back to our community. So having events like we did this gleaning event where we picked fruit and donated it to a food bank, that was one of the volunteering events that we organized in the district that was great, very successful. So I have a great husband and a really close relationship with him and with my kids. Our kids are teenagers. And so there are a lot of events that they're involved in too, like they're doing the junior lifeguards program at the local beach, and they're involved in their sports teams. And so when I'm home, I mean, it's an extremely busy time of life in general, just having a family, having this job, but I feel very highly engaged and active. And I feel like I'm really leaning in and giving it my all on all of those fronts, representing people, attending events, being up here, being completely engaged with the work that's up here, and then going home and doing the same. So there's very much less downtime, but it's also important to maintain your own personal health and balance. So like this morning, I was doing Pilates at 6 a.m. with a group of assembly members. I'm the only senator, and they invited me to join them. So that's something that happens on Wednesday morning. Well, that's important
because you still got to be standing and engaged at 6 p.m. tonight, 12 hours later. So.
Exactly.
Several of your freshman counterparts and many of your upper class members have also come to the Capitol from local government leadership. You all have this unique understanding of the state-local government relationship, having worked at it for many years and now serving as a state senator, creating public policy for those local governments at a state level. What do you see are the shortcomings, perhaps, of that relationship, the tension in it, and how can it be improved?
Well, one of the tensions is that every level of government wants the other level to do more. So, and I think of this particularly around homelessness, that there's a sense of a city saying, this isn't our job. Cities don't have the expertise to deal with mental health or drug addiction issues, but people are actually homeless on city streets. You know, it's the city streets where the tents are being pitched and where people are living in the riverbeds and the canyons. And so, you know, there's a county role, a state role, a city role, and then, of course, a federal role. And our system is so distributed when it comes to power. So it's a diffuse power structure, which can make it, that's our democracy. You know, that's our, in a way, that's the brilliance of it. That's also why we didn't lose our democracy on January 6th. And in the weeks that followed, as every court case went forward and not any court case found that there had been fraud or other problems. I mean, so the distribution of power can be really frustrating because it's hard to then get accountability. It's hard to get leadership. It can be hard to say, okay, who does the buck stop with if you're trying to deal with a problem like, for example, homelessness or climate change or any of our other large existential problems. But I think linking arms and coming to the consensus that we can do this and that we want to do this, we have done a lot and we will continue to. So there's frustration, but I also think there's excitement.
And on that point of the connections and the collaboration, are you finding the same kind of partnerships and relationships here in Sacramento that you invested in and had in your district?
Well, I really like everybody. I really like my colleagues, and I like the advocates who come around. I mean, everybody is very professional and very positive. I thought there might be more collaborative decision making, but I think there's a real effort from the Democratic caucus. We have these weekly lunches, which are great. I learn a lot, and I hear it from my colleagues and from leadership about what is happening and what negotiations are. But I don't find it to be like we're doing group decision making.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of your legislative portfolio and your priorities, which hopefully you're getting some decision-making and collaboration on, from Encinitas to Sacramento, not necessarily perhaps in order of priority, but let's talk about some of those things, particularly that were a priority to you in local government. Among the many issues that you're dealing with in the district and also here in Sacramento, you are the chair of the subcommittee for the Lasan Rail Corridor. It is vital to the movement of freight and passengers, a busy rail corridor down in your district, vulnerable to erosion and climate change, and the rail corridor needs some tender loving care for the future. Talk about that.
Yes. Well, so I was the chair of the transportation agency, and what I'm doing now at the state level is we have a subcommittee of the transportation committee, and it's what's called the Low-San Rail Corridor, which is it's the coastal rail corridor that goes from San Luis Obispo all the way to San Diego. And parts of it are really vulnerable, and it's to sea level rise and bluff instability. The sections, particularly around San Clemente and also Del Mar, it's shut down the rail line. And so it's really important to me, and it should be important to everybody, that this rail line exists and is resilient and that it continues into the indefinite future. But if we don't focus on it as an actual corridor and get the federal and state investments that it needs, we will end up with slowly a decline and then the elimination of the functioning of this rail corridor. Because basically a rail corridor is only as strong as its weakest link. So if you have sections that are not working and people are on an hour bus bridge getting on the freeway to go around a section, you're really not on a train trip anymore.
And I read this morning, actually, they're finally going to reopen it this next week as we speak, putting a temporary buffer on the coastline on the track. So that's good news.
That's very good news. Yeah. So that's one of the things that I'm really involved in. And we'll be having our next hearing. We already had one and we're having another one in August. I think it's August 15th. And then we'll also be doing some tours of the rail corridor. So the other people on this committee represent the line, basically around the line, and are also interested in it.
Let's talk about homelessness. You've referenced it a couple of times. It's a key priority in the district and statewide, and affordable housing. You have two bills. One is a bill continuing to move through the process this year. One is a 2-year bill requiring cities and counties to provide housing for their homeless and special needs housing that serves unhoused individuals with little or no income and have greatest needs.
Yeah, well, so within minutes of being sworn in, I introduced my first bill, SB 7, and that's this homeless bill, which would make it so that every city was obligated to provide homeless serving housing according to the point in time count number. So that's basically the number that we know how many homeless people there are in every community based on this point in time count that's done. So the idea is in this bill was that every city would have an obligation. And I am modeling that after the obligation cities have to provide the zoning for low-income housing. So there's a whole system in place to do that. Now, the bill has been turned into a 2-year bill. I'm not sure exactly what will end up happening with the bill, if it will be modified or narrowed. Something needs to change clearly in order for it to move forward. But homelessness is the top issue for the residents of this state. So when you ask people, what is the biggest problem you see around you? I mean, homelessness is the top issue. And it's surprising to me that we don't seem to have the urgency to deal with it that I think we should. So for example, in the state budget, there's only 1 year of the budget that's actually allocated to deal with homelessness. It's $1 billion in HAP funding, and that is not, it could potentially not be there in future years. And you can't solve a problem in a 1-year time. Even to do a 3-year plan, I mean, it takes as much time to do a 1-year plan as a 3-year plan. And you can't enter into leases, you can't hire people, you can't open a navigation center, all the things for 1 year. So when we're distributing to counties and regions from the state level this money, it just needs to be ongoing. But it also needs to be, we need a goal. I mean, ultimately, the fact that the state has not set any homeless reduction goals is really a glaring problem. Because to me, what it's clear the state has done is to say locals need to set their own goals. But really, if we want the state to be involved in solving the state's largest problem, we need to have actual goals, and then we need to have a strategic approach to meet those goals. So the idea of just saying, here are a list of activities that we are doing, or activities that could happen. We could build this kind of shelter, or this kind of interim housing, or this kind of social services, this kind of drug treatment. That is not going to get us actually to a reduction in homelessness. And really, this is a major, major problem. We have more than 170,000 homeless people in the state, and we have a full quarter of the homeless people in the nation live in this state. So it's a true emergency, and we need to have just a much more of an all hands on deck approach to dealing with it.
Another issue, which I know you're very passionate about, another emergency that we're dealing with not only in the state but nationwide, is gun violence. You have a set of bills related to this issue, which I know are, again, it's a huge priority for you, requiring gun purchasers to have liability insurance, requiring gun sellers to post warnings about the danger of having a firearm in your home, and then another bill that would require all semi-automatic pistols in California to use microstamping technology. And just finished a podcast conversation the other day with Senator Portantino on some of these issues. It all makes sense. It's all a no-brainer, if you will, but still very difficult, even in California, to have this debate. But talk about your passion for this issue and these bills.
Yes. So gun violence to me is such a preventable tragedy. So guns are the number one killer of youth now, not cars. So for years and years and years, it was cars. But cars we've actually made safer, and we've made our roads safer, and more people have guns. We have more guns than people in this country. So it's almost an addiction. It's like our gun obsession in this country is really striking to me all the time. But the reality of not looking at this as a public health situation, people die of all sorts of things, and we take it very seriously. But guns are in this it's almost like a third rail because of the Second Amendment and how energized and activated people get over gun ownership. So that was the second bill I introduced on my first day within minutes of being sworn in, is that bill you referred to, SB 8, which would have required everybody who owns a gun to have an insurance policy, so that just like your car, if it accidentally kills somebody, then your insurance policy pays the victim to compensate them for that loss. And this would be the same concept. And in a way, it's crazy that we insure everything in this country. You insure your life, you insure your trip, from the biggest thing to the littlest thing. You insure your house and flood and fire and absolutely everything. But we don't insure guns. It's just crazy. So I think inevitably at some point, this, I'm sure, will be part of our legal landscape. But right now it isn't. And it didn't make it even through the first committee, which was the insurance committee. I had an informational hearing. But it's the same thing where guns are a third rail issue. So I'll continue to work on that bill and other bills. I think we could do a lot more to make gun ownership safer. I mean, there are things that are out of our control, like, for example, banning assault weapons. Weapons of war, I don't think should be owned by civilians, but that's something that has to be dealt with at the federal level. So recent federal court cases, Supreme Court cases, and then other court cases really have gone against those of us who care about gun safety and gun violence prevention. And so I'm hopeful that we'll be able to make changes, but I recognize that it's also going to be a long road.
The Governor Newsom, has proposed essentially a constitutional conversation about the issue of gun violence and a ban on assault weapons, notwithstanding those who say, what is the likelihood of this ever happening, and the potential Pandora's box it could open to everybody wanting their 2 cents in about how we change our Constitution. Do you support that conversation just in principle? Like, go for it. Let's see what we can do.
It's bold. I like it. I mean, we've done all sorts of things by amending our Constitution. Of course, the Bill of Rights was the beginning of it, but we've extended the right to vote to women, to African Americans, to everybody. We have done incredible things by changing our Constitution. And so the idea of having a constitutional convention where we would take up this issue, I think is a good idea. I support it.
One final issue on this lightning round of your bills and policies here, harassment on the job. Looking at the workplace, you have a bill that would provide employers with the ability to seek a temporary civil restraining order on behalf of an employee who is harassed at work. And very timely issue was reported this week that nearly 3/4 of the elected officials in your county have reported being threatened or harassed. University of San Diego study on this. Harassment is still prevalent on the job.
Yeah, I think abuse and harassment has really increased with social media and also with just since Trump's presidency and the reality of the way that we talk to each other. And I think when that's modeled at the top by mocking and by targeting, and we see this right now as well across a wide range of different types of our civic dialogue. And it's coming into all areas. So even somebody who works in a school district and is dealing with the public, parents in the school district, that person could be subject to harassment. And my bill is aimed at the fact that the woman who's sitting at the desk when the parents come in, and if somebody is harassing her or, for example, leaving phone messages again and again and again, or playing herself back to herself on her own messages, that's an example of something that happened in the city of Carlsbad. She is experiencing that because of the job. So the employer should be able to seek the restraining order. And it should be at the level of harassment, not at the level of the threat of violence. Because right now, the employer could get a restraining order to protect the employee if it was a threat of violence, but we don't want it to have to get to that. So this bill lowers that threshold so that the employee herself doesn't have to go get the restraining order. It's time, it's expertise, it's money. And you also don't want to have to be in direct relation with the person who's harassing you. So having the employer do it just makes a lot more sense.
This conversation is making me think of another element of this. Encinitas is a very progressive city. I guess you could be proud to say you were not the first woman mayor of the city of Encinitas. But as a woman mayor, the chief up at the dais, did you have to work extra hard to command the respect of the city and your colleagues? Was that a difficult thing?
Encinitas is very progressive, and it has actually had, so we incorporated it as a city in 1986, more than 30 years, and we've had more women mayors than men mayors, which is actually, that's very unusual for a city. And so I think there is a wide acceptance of women in leadership. It was important to me that I build the pipeline for women, so I was always looking to appoint women to the commissions, to get them involved in that civic process, and then to run for council and to encourage women to see the leadership qualities in themselves that I already saw in them. Because I think sometimes it can be hard to make that leap, especially into local office. So I don't feel like I had a problem running the meeting or commanding the room. I only had one time where I had to call a recess because the person would not sit down. She was really upset about vacation rentals and she absolutely refused to leave. And I had to call a recess over that. But I think there were other things, like I received an anonymous rape threat on my phone.
Good Lord, jeez.
And it addressed me by name. And the sheriff's never found anybody. It was a burner phone. But that's the kind of thing that's it's a terrorism that's based on gender, because a rape threat makes you feel vulnerable as a woman and fearing a man, obviously, and the sexual violence of that. And so the fact that somebody was willing to and did do that, it just shows you the level at which somebody really does see that they could control or somehow influence me or make me feel fear, and that they like that. That's something that gave them a sense of power.
I appreciate you being so candid about this. Final thought,
Yes.
Final questions here as you come up to Sacramento, your legislative and policy priorities. It makes me think, as a member comes in earnest and ready to go, and literally upon swearing in, they're bringing bills to the desk. At the back end of a career, this was several years ago, one of the former assembly members, actually it was Phil Eisenberg way back in the day, got up in his goodbye speech to his colleagues and said, in order to be successful here in Sacramento, you have to remember that you can only influence policy, you can only change things on the margins of life. Whether it's climate change or whether it's homelessness issues, you're not going to solve homelessness. You're not going to cure climate change. To give up on the big miracles and just do things incrementally. Now, as an ambitious person with goals, I'm sure that's a little bit upsetting, but do you agree with that? Does that attitude, that realistic approach to how far a person can progress with legislation in the years that they're here, does that temper you, or does that just fuel the ambition to push harder?
I think that change happens at both levels. So there's the phrase that, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. Yes. But eventually you can eat the elephant, right? So systems level change doesn't happen overnight. You don't just turn a big ship in the ocean on a dime. But I think that there's no question that as you're working on things, as you're making incremental progress and then more moderate size and then bigger progress, you do get to systems level change. And that's why, I mean, honestly, I think the reflection on my time as mayor as being a Blakespear era, it's a reflection on the amount of things we did get done. And there are periods where change doesn't happen as fast, and then there are periods when it does happen. So recognizing that some of that you can't control because it's the world that's around you at that time. But I think we can only do our best. And that I feel like for me, that's really leaning in, spending my energy and time trying to make changes to the problems that I identify. So I don't in any way feel like I am coasting or will be coasting. Like I feel just very motivated to try to do as much as I can, but also recognizing that you have to have other people around you who also care about the same things. I mean, that's one of the really exciting things about being in Sacramento. You hear about Washington, D.C. and the gridlock and how difficult it is to work together. I feel like we work really well with the Republicans here, and it is a supermajority Democrat legislature. And so the opportunity of what that means is that if you have a good idea and you can get other people on board, you can do anything. You know, so I don't actually feel in any way like that phrase that I feel tempered by that. I think there are all sorts of bills you see that are relatively small. Some of them are district specific and they're important for the people in the district. So even if they're small for the state, they're important to the district. But systems level change does happen. And we in California are a great example of that.
Great way to end this conversation. Thank you for your passion and your determination and being here in Sacramento. We wish you the best. Blessings to your mom for joining us, and glad to have that former 11-year-old girl here in Sacramento doing the work for your district. So thank you for joining us on Denver's California. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
State Senator Catherine Blakespear, representing California's 38th Senate District, encompassing northern San Diego County and southern Orange County. And that's a wrap for this edition of Then There's California. We're a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus, with technical assistance and production support from John Roman, Eric Robertson, Brian Shadden, McLeana Woods, Michelle Baker, Sergio Reyes, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. I'm Brian Green at the State Capitol in Sacramento. Thanks for listening to Then There's California.